there's money to be made everywhere. And, why you want to be the next, Mark Zuckerberg, why you want to be the next Elon Musk? You can create anything you want out there.
On this week's episode of the Silicon Valley Podcast, we sit down with JP Keating. He's the managing partner and founder of ProChain Ventures, a US-based venture capital firm investing in teams and technologies that are transforming supply chains for good. With over 25 years of supply chain and venture experience in various industries, he's leveraging his domain expertise in network to identify and support the most compelling supply chain technologies and driven founders. On this week's episode, we talk about what are some of the challenges that startups and investors face in this space. How does this technology evolve? How important is the supply chain and mobility to the overall economics of a city or a country? Globally, who are the ones most interested in supply chain technology? How important is understanding regulations and policies when looking at or building a company in the supply chain space? And much more. All right, let's begin this week's episode of the Silicon Valley Podcast. Enjoy. All right, I'm super excited for this week's episode of the Silicon Valley Podcast. I have JP Keating. And me and JP, we've had a couple conversations. His background and his focus for what he looks at, it's very interesting. But before we dive into the questions, JP, can you give our audience a high-level overview of your career up until this point?
Sure. Again, JP Keating, managing partner of ProChain Ventures. I like to say we're investing in companies that are transforming supply chains for good. And as you sort of alluded to, we're a specialist venture firm investing entirely in supply chain technologies, enterprise SaaS, as well as some mobility things. My history is a little crazy versus most VCs out there. I spent 25 years in Fortune 500s across probably 12 different verticals. It was 5 different companies. I went from aerospace to beer and theme parks to utilities, electric and gas utilities to food and agriculture, and then ended up in financial services at the end. But how I landed in this was, really started my career in supply chain and procurement, and that was sort of the basis of my thinking going forward. And then moving to the other side into more sales roles, development, that kind of stuff. Got a very, very clear picture that supply chain operations drove the success of businesses. And as I progressed through my career, ended up in a lot of different roles that kept pushing me towards venture and innovation. And it was driven by me running small business liaison programs and corporate startup collaboration programs and supplier diversity programs, because I was out trying to find new innovative solutions to help us reduce costs, increase revenue, fix processes, innovate for our big companies. And that's really how I fell in love with venture. And a couple of years ago, decided it's time to go pro. I had been that VC volunteer for probably a decade plus, and realized I can do this. We're in a unique time, and we've got an unfair advantage and some unique insight that can drive some real success here. So that the long and short of it, right there.
Most people, they hear about supply chain. Supply chain was disrupted. We're not going to get lumber. Lumber prices go up, or we can't get this one chip, so now nothing can be manufactured. For our audience that really, just heard a few things on the news, but really doesn't understand, can you give us some information on I almost want to say the basics of the supply chain?
Yeah. I could talk for days on this one. And just kind of simplify it for people is that when you hear the term supply chain, it's not a linear progression of things. It's part of it. You kind of think of it as an assembly line, but in reality, it's just this giant web of systems. And we always use the term systems of systems. And it's you're interacting in this environment that is being affected by so many different things. Like when you talk like chip shortages, right? Chip shortages are this much, a chip is this much of the manufacturer of a vehicle or something like that. But it's basically the brain of the vehicle. So you can't run the whole thing without that piece. So you've got a piece of your supply chain that is struggling. Um, and then you keep kind of going back into what's causing that, and you realize, oh, well, they have their own supply chain in there where they're trying to get, the silicon, the wafers, the labor, dealing with the shipping and logistics, the planning, all of that is causing that problem. Now take that and multiply that across, your entire product, and you start to see where there are problems. And when COVID happened, like everyone's like, "Oh my God, supply chain problem. It's just delivery." I'm like, no, these kinds of problems have existed since the beginning of time. And when you remove the human from that, now you realize how fragile really everything is. And everybody's thinking about, oh, AI is going to fix supply chain. It's not. Humans are part of this system. The technology behind it is the enabler of those humans to be able to make these supply chains work, because it is a combination of sort of process and creativity. And so now you have to be able to operate in that world of creativity, and you need people for that. The tech can solve a lot of the other problems, but um, when you in so again, it's like you can't look at supply chain as an individual problem for everything. You have to look at how it's applied to each one of those goods, services, regions, countries, regulated industries versus lesser regulated things, and what drives all of that. And so that's where that systems level thinking needs to come in around all of this. But it's fascinating. I mean, it can be extremely complex, it can be extremely simple. Everybody thinks of really big problems breaking the whole system. A lot of times, it's those little things out there that broke the system. You had a supplier, or you had a regulator, or you had a system that broke down that is fairly low value in the reality of the picture, but a $2 part can shut down an assembly line. It can stop a plane from taking off. One sick person with COVID can't fill the role for the day, and now you can't operate your operation as efficiently and effectively as you want. So it's endless, which is so exciting to us, is because we look at it and go, there's endless opportunity for innovation. There's endless opportunity for deal flow. And so that's why we focused entirely on this thing.
You'd mentioned, regulations. How important are government policies? How important are new laws, regulations, tariffs in the supply chain? I mean, how
Yeah.
big could they impact just something that gets voted on yesterday? Could it completely disrupt? I mean, how on top of things does the company have to be for the entire supply chain for their product?
It is a key element of your operation. Most of the businesses I came out of were all highly, highly regulated. You do not have a license to operate unless you're approved by the regulator. And I always look at it as, look, embrace it early. Don't fight it. Embrace it. Bring the regulators in to understand, so that you can be as innovative and creative as you want. Most of the time, regulators just want insight. They don't really want oversight of this thing. They just want insight to understand where it is and how it's going to affect the general public. And so overall, I like operating in highly regulated spaces, because they're there for a reason. They're there to protect the people. And that's what business is all about, is people serving people here. And we need to have some level of oversight, because you're going to start harming humans here. Be it with false information that everybody's talking about with AI right now, or with a vehicle. You've got to do that. You look at autonomous vehicles, that can't be unregulated. It just can't be. And you will immediately lose if you don't embrace it. So I look at it as a constant balance. You want to be protected by the regulators, but you also don't want to be overregulated. I think we're sort of blessed here in the U.S. that we have a really nice balance versus other parts of the world where you can't do things. Everybody's fights the government about regulation. Well, you look at it the other way, the US government really wants us to do well, period. They will do anything they can to help drive commerce for us to be able to operate around the world. So it's a constant balancing act. And again, with that, depending upon, like you had just asked about how other effects here with with um, with legislators and leaders and everybody else, what can happen? You throw in tariffs in there, it will throw a monkey wrench into it. And so now you just rebuild. You have to innovate your supply chain and how you're getting things and where it's going and what the rules state and what you can do. And then also look at the opportunities to bring things back. There's a huge narrative around that right now, and a lot of that's going to be good. Um, and so it's constantly balancing that and having visibility into what's going on and actively managing that. You can't just be subject to it. You have to engage with it, because it will. You have the ability to influence things in the United States versus a lot of other places. And if you work with the right people, you can come to a balance, and commerce can thrive. The government is appeased, the people feel safe and heard, and all is good. So, overall, just embrace it, work with it, build a capability around working with regulators, and things will work out just fine.
Speaking of working with regulators or just in general, what are some of the challenges that startups and investors might face in this sector, this space that aren't prevalent in other areas?
Yeah, I think, for both investors and startups is really having a strong understanding of how these large scale supply chain operations and management outfits work. And they're complicated. Right? You can't just say, oh, well, we think this is going to work. It goes back to that systems of systems thinking that we go into. You look at each enterprise, regardless of the TAM associated with all of this, it's really getting a strong understanding of how that industry works internally, how it works within inside its own individual company, and then what those interactions look like between the customers and the community and that company. And so I found that most folks don't have the operating experience to really understand how that all works and how that can impact the success of a startup. The good startups, like the ones that we work with, have a background in that. So like we're not really looking at companies that have a tool looking to solve a problem. It's really focused on, here's the real problem. We know this is a problem because we've been dealing with it for our careers. And those are the ones that I really, really like. But the same thing, when we've looked at other tech where, they're smart founders, they come up with an interesting idea, but they literally have no background in it. Especially when it comes to some of our aviation hardware. Like, we're going to create this. Hey, no, you're not. It's like you 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 miss the key elements for success in this space, and so much of that is driven by very strong, secure, resilient supply chain with really strong talent running that, be able to deliver on that customer promise, and being able to, back to the regulatory, to be able to deliver on that regulation promise that you have made as well. So I think that's where we add a lot of value and a lot of understanding, because we've done it. We understand it. We've seen it across multiple companies, multiple verticals, and have a point of view that's a lot different than the typical financial investor. Um, and then the startups, love the fact that we can finish their sentences too. So we can have a really deep discussion about that go to market, that internal engagement, that delivery of the service of the product, and then can really help give them some thoughts and ideas about the people involved with this. And I think I mentioned it one time before when we talked, was I don't think most folks understand the power that is wielded by one or two people inside of big enterprises, and the ability to make a decision on something, or to buy a technology. And if folks don't know who those people are, or the type of personality that they have, or their goals and objectives, you're gonna win, you're gonna lose immediately, and that's going to take many cycles to get over that to be able to get back into somebody. So that's another thing that I think a lot of folks miss the depth of that issue, um, and just see it as another sort of SaaS transaction. It's not quite that. So those are the big things, and that's where that, like I said, that's really where our value is to really understand that and be able to help the startups and the investors navigate. So we have the good fortune of working with a bunch of lead investors who are looking for expertise from us. And so we're able to co-invest there and be able to provide a point of view and help them with their decision making, as well as helping that portfolio company reach a level of success.
You'd mentioned the a lot of people not understanding the key decision maker in big corporations for making a decision. With that, my question is, these sales cycles, I would guess, for logistics and supply technology would probably be pretty long. How do these startups navigate that, especially when it comes to their runway and how much money they have to get these initial clients? If it's what is it normally, a 6 month, 1 year sales cycle, I'm guessing?
Yeah, it all depends. It all depends on the tech and how it works. And again, the key is really understanding those customers. If they don't know them, start finding people that do. And that's where we came in a few of our deals. Was they're like, we know this works here. How does it potentially work there? We had got some initial traction with some smaller customers. How do we start approaching the big ones? And again, it comes down to just networking and finding the people that have strong connections to some of those decision makers, or at least have some kind of a relationship. Either just kind of like professional courtesy in a lot of ways. Like that's kind of where we're able to help, and we're able to focus some resources to the startups. Is like, we've got a relationship with this particular supply chain executive, and we know they're connected to these other ones out there. So let's start building a relationship with point A, and that'll get us to the other point. And it's a fairly I don't call it quite a tight knit community, but there's a lot of professional respect in that world, because we're all dealing with the same pain. Uh, and so and everybody's looking for something interesting to make their operation better. But overall, it's really learning as much as you can, and just reaching out to anybody that has a strong connection to one of those folks. If you're trying to get to the head of transportation for a big Fortune 500, sometimes you can reach out directly, but there's plenty of other uh, transportation industry groups out there that you can get engaged with. So, like, and when it comes to supply chain, we're actively telling folks you need to get involved with the ISM, which is the Institute for Supply Management. You need to get involved with the CSTMP, which is the Council for Supply Chain Management Professionals. And that is where you can get direct access to a lot of these end users, and the people that are making decisions, and the ones that can point you into the right directions. And so, um, I love those routes, and there's a number of those organizations out there for even more specific things. There's transportation clubs that are members that are all shipping and trucking companies in certain cities, and starting to inject yourself into those gets you in front of a lot of people, and you can build a lot of trust and respect there. But it's just yeah, it's a slog. There's no quick way to do it that I have discovered. The cycles are long, and so now it's figuring out how to build your pipeline. If you get a firm no from any of these folks, well, then put them off. But a lot of them are like, we wouldn't mind looking at this in 6 months to a year. It's just we don't have a budget, or it's just outside the cycle. But come back. So there's ways to do it. But with all that being said, there are companies that have corporate startup collaboration efforts, that have their corporate venture groups. And that's where I spent my time, was working with these companies to try and figure out, can we do like a proof of value, a proof of concept on a small scale and test it out that way. So approaching those kinds of groups is really, really, really helpful.
Can you talk about that? Because as you bring that up, that is something I'm not really sure we've really covered on the podcast ever. Just having that proof of concept or pitching it to uh, a corporate. Do you have any suggestions, any thoughts, any tidbits for a company that's looking to do proof of concept or have that conversation?
Yeah. It's first just finding the groups. Not all companies have them, but some do, and it would be focusing some efforts on finding those folks that do that. And you can really, and a lot of them are run through the corporate ventures group. Other ones are run through um, innovation groups. Some are run through corp dev. It's just you got to do some homework, and call around and start asking questions. But the other ones too that are very good are those really early stage accelerators out there. So, for example, like with insurance, if you want to do insurtech or fintech or something like that, the Global Insurance Accelerator in Des Moines, Iowa, is connected to every insurance company out there. They run an accelerator, they do the connections. All of the corporates are members of it. So that's always a good one. That's always a kind of good angle to look at too. One of the other groups that I work with a lot is Alchemist Accelerator, and Alchemist is
I'm an advisor
there
there
you go.
for
So
everyone out there.
it's an enterprise business accelerator. They're not doing consumer product. So all the folks that are in there are going to be that B2B buyer, if you will. And those are the kinds of folks that you want to talk to. And again, it's a great organization. They've got endless mentors, within Alchemist that you can reach out to and learn from. The other big one where a lot of corporates are engaged, probably the biggest one, is going to be Plug and Play. They have all their different verticals, and all of their customers are really big corporates. And so I see a lot of companies go through there, and we work with them on a number of things too. So while we don't, one of these days maybe we'll build an accelerator or something cool. we don't, I don't have the time or the funding to deal with that right now, but you'll find them. You'll find those to be kind of good resources to get in front of some people and start the conversation. And from there, you can start leveraging their networks, because they'll for sure say, you know what, I don't know if it'll work here, but I know the chief supply chain officer here where it might make some more sense. Let's set something up there. And then from that point, everybody does their own POCs in different ways. There's never, I haven't seen like the way to do it. But it's mostly just getting in, having the conversations, seeing what is possible, and then testing it from there.
And for our audience out there, we did interview the founder, Ravi Balani. He was, I'm not sure what episode number. I'd say between 20 and 30. So for our audience out there, if you want to find out more about the Alchemist Accelerator, its history, more information, go into our archives, check out that episode. JP, logistics and supplies. I think just software making things move faster, zeros and ones, but there's so much more to it with mobility and the startups navigating the vehicles, last mile. More information on what's being built there, the technology that people are developing.
Yeah. Well, you're right. And again, I could go on for days here. When you kind of look at the environment of what's going on, is I narrowed it down to a few, but I have a much bigger slide. But when we look at this, like, we're looking at economic and national security. We're looking at environmental sustainability, legislative threats that are coming out there. How we can solve problems within these two things. We're looking at those analog, inefficient systems out there that haven't changed in years. We're looking at workforce strain and just kind of terrible user experience for both the employee and the customer. We're trying to solve for that. And then overall, you don't want to believe in any of this stuff. It's about enabling more margin, right? Making more money. And you've got to be more efficient, effective, safer, sustainable than you've ever had to be before, to be able to protect the margins, to grow the margins, and deal with all of those potential impacts that are happening because of all those other elements that I spoke of. And then you throw the societal impacts on that as well, where you've got to address that too. But you know, as you alluded to there, we look at mobility. So a lot of the stuff is enterprise SaaS, ones and zeros that's enabling all of these other things to happen. When you look at the logistics software, it's be able to better position and move the hardware. We tell everybody this is a digital and physical world working together here. You can't just say supply chain is just freight brokerage. That's not it. You've got to look at both the hardware and the software. And we, from a mobility standpoint, I really like mobility because I started in that in my career. I started my career at Boeing, spent about a third of my career there. And so I love big stuff made out of metal. And so I can't quite get away with it. But from everything that's out there right now, you're looking at, autonomous cars, autonomous trucks, I've got autonomous rail cars, autonomous aircraft, or even, electric powered things that are moving people. We stay away from anything that moves people for the most part. We're looking at things that move cargo. Now, how can we move cargo more effectively and efficiently?
Question, is there a reason behind that? You stay away from things that move people? Is it liability?
Yes.
Is it what? Or are there more opportunities for development in the other? Why that?
Yeah. So a few things. One, I don't want anything associated with moving humans because of liability. Just the danger involved with it. And we don't need people moving cargo in a lot of ways here. So in certain things, yes, you do. You can't get rid of it. No doubt there. But and we get real specific about what we do where there's a person involved with it. But the second reason is this new technology is going to be able to enable all of these new supply chains. It needs to be developed quickly. And so why we invested in an autonomous cargo aircraft, a large scale autonomous cargo aircraft. If you had a human flying that, now you have to develop an aircraft that can sustain life for just the crew, but also any passengers. So you kind of by default have to create an aircraft that's going to move people. That takes a heck of a lot longer to develop, takes longer to get approved, takes longer to test. And it's going to be a long time before any of my investors will see a return. But the autonomous tech, and we speak with a lot of authority around it because we came out of this background. It's very safe. It can execute the mission. The tech is there already to be able to do this. So now you're talking about applying it to a problem where you've got a pilot shortage, you've got restrictions on how often that you can fly. You don't have a lot of flexibility in airports where you can land and things like that. Plus, the cost is rather high. We found ways to reduce the cost, or increase the throughput, and be able to reduce the time associated with all of the logistics around air cargo. So, one, we don't have to fly people, but we still have a human in the loop of this whole thing that's able to fly 3 of these at the same time. And now you've got the oversight over the whole thing, but the technology is still there to be able to do the bulk of the work. But you have to have a human there in the event something happens. But in reality, when you look at statistics around air accidents, it's usually pilot failure in some way. So it's really unique. It's different. We like those a lot. We did the same thing with our autonomous railcar company, Intramotive. It was they don't need a locomotive to move these cars around because they're battery powered and self propelled. So now again, you can increase throughput, reduce costs, and you're actually putting more people to work because the goal here is to take some other traffic off the roads and move it to rail, and also reducing the use of trucks and mining and all of that. And so again, it's very simple. They can run these things 24/7. maintain them as they need to, but there's no humans in the way, so that they can prevent a lot of the injuries associated with it, a lot of the fatigue, just a lot of the burnout associated with it. So we need to keep humans in this. So we need to have a better user experience, if you will. So so we really, really like those because one, like I said, they usually cost less to operate, and you can have more throughput. But I'm also going to see a return in less than 20 years. You start looking at that 10-year fund cycle. We'll definitely start seeing returns within that 10-year period, versus with a manned aircraft where we're looking at probably 20 before something happens.
I'm kind of curious, thinking about what you just said about putting more people to work and the efficiencies increasing. How big of an impact could adopting this supply chain technology and mobility be for the economics of a city or the GDP of say a small country? I'm just thinking, increasing, changing, investing in this area could really have outsized returns for the city or country in whole. What's your
Oh
take
yeah.
on that?
Yeah, agree. I wish I had a good number to throw at it, but I don't. The only number we kind of use is when we look at the general size of supply chain on the globe. It's about $12 trillion opportunity. So now you're talking about billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of impact here across a lot of different things. And so you have to segment it all. So I won't get too deep into that, but let's just take intermotive as an example. One reason why I really liked it is that it can start to revitalize a lot of cities that had rail traffic at one point in time, that now you just use trucks. So when you start looking at the long distance capabilities of this, you can now do same day delivery via a rail car between, you know, San Francisco, LA, St. Louis, Kansas City, St. Louis, Chicago, wherever. Um, and you can run the thing right into a rail center, into a city. Most of those rail centers, some of them have shrunk, they're in disrepair. But now you're able to start rebuilding this infrastructure that's actually been there for 150 plus years, and revitalizing these communities around these rail centers, because now you're not belching out all this diesel smoke, and it's quiet. So you're bringing in these electric rail cars that can then offload their cargo to an electric truck, or electric, basically, an electric cab that can handle short haul. And so now you've got the ability to um, to make that supply chain logistics operation extremely efficient, and knowing where things are. And you've got this flexibility in it now too, where you don't have people waiting for hours for a load to come in. They know when it's coming in. It's by right. We're gonna get 5, 10 cars. We're gonna need 5 or 10 cabs to pull this thing. And now you can utilize those electric trucks for the short haul. You've got jobs for people that they're not over the road truck drivers. They can go home at night. They're still making good money in what they're doing. We haven't eliminated any humans from it, because now we need the people to control all the rail cars in these yards. And so I look at it that way of, we're we're impacting communities, but we're also impacting the environment where we are as well. Not belching out all this nasty diesel smoke and everything else associated with it. So that there's one there, but now they're looking at, between Nautilus and Intramotive. There's a lot of interest coming out of the Middle East and Saudi Arabia, looking to build their communities there now, with a lot of things that they're doing, as well as in Canada, for both the applications, trying to impact, like, the remote mining operations out there, where it's difficult to get the ores back. You can do this with rail, and you can land these aircraft, like a Nautilus aircraft. They're 3.8 ton. You can land it in like an 800-meter unimproved runway, And so now you're able to bring in supplies to these operations where it was expensive and difficult to do it before, and you can do it at a very, very high level cadence. So I see even, communities being built in different places. We were talking about island nations earlier. Now you've got affordable vehicles in in an autonomous aircraft or in a sea glider, which is another one called Regent Craft that we had invested in, where now they're able to connect to different economies much more efficiently and effectively, um, and at a higher cadence than they could before. So this is what's really exciting to me is you don't need this massive infrastructure of all of this um, all these transportation technologies anymore. You can utilize these new methods to deliver on goods and services in a lot of different ways. So yeah, I've got a big dream. There's no doubt. I mean, I can draw it out one day and show you.
I think it was really interesting. I mean, it reminds me of just this past weekend. I was driving to Santa Cruz to meet a buddy for breakfast. Me and my wife were spending the day there. And on, Google Maps, it's a 45-minute drive, not too bad. And once we got on the road, that 45-minute turned into an hour 15. And then it was, over 2 hours because there was an accident on this one freeway. I never really thought about how, accidents over like the five or all these places where it's really one road to get there could impact the supply chain by that much.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it makes total sense what you're talking about with the rails, just everything being clockwork.
Yeah.
So
We talk a lot about flexibility, resiliency, and optionality. That's the key with this work is okay, what happened here? Well, everybody looks at the Red Sea right now. Now, as soon as you got to go around, okay, Horn, it costs. You watch a dollar sign start spinning, and it's like, okay, what's here that we can change the route? What can we do? The operators out there want that. They want that flexibility. They want that resiliency. They want that optionality and the flexibility to be able to do the things that they need to do to deliver their goods. And there's so many different ways to do this now because now it's becoming much more economical to do it. So, like when we look at like a Nautilus, it's about air cargo is much more expensive than sea cargo, but utilizing an aircraft like this because it's so efficient that you're reducing that cost by an enormous percentage, and now you're enabling even more next day delivery from all sorts of different locations around the world, around your country, around your region that didn't exist before. And so now it's just another transportation method for your company and how you want to service your customer.
so going back to a previous conversation that we had, there was something that was very interesting that I remembered that I think our audience would also enjoy. You made the comment of the perfect situation of stacking bills without anyone knowing who you are. Can you share a little bit about this philosophy to the audience?
Yeah, it's just funny. I don't know. When I look at business again, I spent so many years, and I say 25, it's more like 30, around so many industries. Got to be a little longer than that. Jeez, I've been working since I was 14, but so many of these different industries, and I got to meet so many people, and you never hear about any of them or anything they're doing, but there's just millionaires being minted every day doing stuff that no one has any clue that exists out there. And I think so many folks get hung up around what's flashy on TV. Oh, we're going to be this. Why? There's money to be made everywhere. And, why you want to be the next, Mark Zuckerberg, why you want to be the next Elon Musk? You can create anything you want out there. And what I loved about our industry is most people aren't ever going to hear about any of our companies in the news. They're not gonna know these founders, but these are the companies that are enabling all of society, right? None of the other stuff happens without these companies making it happen, and that's what's fun about it. And so I just was like, we run into some folks that and hear folks, we're going to do this. You can, but why do you want to subject yourself to that? You can, you can make so much money doing these things in spaces that no one knows about, little niches that are supporting certain things. And I love meeting the founders and the business owners that have done that. And they live their lives. They can do anything they want, and their businesses just continue to thrive in what they're doing because they're solving real problems and servicing their customers in real ways and innovating their businesses usually to keep it going. And so I love those founders that nobody ever hears about, who ever does, and you're like, wow, I had no idea that business was run by a top 100 billionaire in the world. No idea who these folks are. But then again, being in the industrial space like I was, you met a lot of these folks, and I just love that. And you can you don't have to be on the news, you don't have to do anything. You can do as much good in the world as you want to do. You can donate your money however you want to do it. And I respected that a lot. These founders were quiet. They kept their heads down and they just worked extremely hard and built businesses. And they said, hey, look, they're stacking paper all day long and nobody knows this. So, forget the flashy stuff that you see out there. And you're like, I want to do it. Go find something really boring, dirty and dull that needs to be fixed. And we're going to see great companies come out of that. And those are the ones that we want to support.
It's always crazy as an investment banker. I get some stuff introduced to me that I just shake my head going, they're making how much money and they're doing what?
Yeah. Yeah. It's unbelievable. I mean, it is unbelievable. And you take a look at these companies and you go, wow, okay, they figured it out. And I've watched a lot of these companies over the years, they get rolled up, consolidated, and they've built massive, nationwide companies, enterprises that are just raking in $500 million a year or more. Nobody has any clue what's going on. It's the normal everyday thing you see sitting, a building by the side of the road. You don't even think twice about it. It's not a flashy consumer product or anything, but these are the ones that, like I said, enable society. I used to look at being in the utilities business. Nobody has any idea who the construction companies are that are building the lines out there and putting everything into your house. But they are all multi-billion dollar enterprises that have been around forever. And then the companies that create a lot of that technology, same thing. They've been industrial firms nobody even thinks about. Nobody's even around them. They're not flashy, but again, they make everything work. And it's not, it was kind of our little secret to be in that world. No, I just told everybody, but that's what we like. Those are the ones we like. You don't have to keep up with Joneses in a lot of ways when it comes to consumer. If it's a consumer brand, most likely the companies we're working with are the ones building the consumer brand for somebody. And if that consumer brand stops, another one will take its place. And our businesses will get paid. and we continue on.
Speaking of that, before wrapping up, I guess two questions. One, companies in this space, I'm guessing a lot of them, their exit's not that big IPO, that big flashy. It's more earlier. Do you want to talk about what's the typical stage where there's that exit for the investors to get their money back? And then also, if there's any story of a company that you've worked with, or just a story in general of the industry that you want to share before wrapping up. So two questions in one, I guess.
Yeah. So exit wise, I think we talked about the data one time. When you look at venture exits, at least the last data I looked at, most of them all happen under $200 million valuation. So, your chances of hitting a unicorn are slim, right? So in an hour space, that's likely going to hold true. That's what we built our thesis around, was we're really looking for companies that are building something great that will be acquired by the time they reach a certain revenue level, certain level of traction. My hope is that they get acquired after a Series A. That's where I would like to play because we invested pre-seed or very early seed, very low valuation. So we'd like to see that happen before they get to a B round. Now, some could make some sense, but some of the ones out there that got a lot of the press around supply chain uh, have raised so much money that it has sort of prevented an exit. And my job as a VC is produce returns. So I take that very seriously. In that, if I really don't think it has a chance, we're gonna not do it, or we're just gonna abandon it. In most of the cases of everything out there, they're gonna get acquired. So we looked at. I don't think anything. Maybe one or two have the potential to do an IPO at some point in time. But it's just going to depend, and most of those are probably going to be the big hardware firms that we're looking at. And that's fine. Going into it, we know that that's kind of it, and that kind of operating environment is fine for that sort of thing. But SaaS and all that, definitely looking at exits before they hit a B, if we can do it. So that's my goal. Um, a story about a company. Oh boy, I got all kinds of stories. I will say my favorite one. It goes back to what we were just talking about: boring businesses, right? That just make money. So we invested in a company called Laundress. It's Laundris. And the reason it's called Laundress is that they invented a technology that was a digital inventory management platform for hotel linens and laundry. And everybody said, that's boring. Why would you do that? What is that? That's not interesting at all. That's not interesting to you, but it's interesting to us because the linen and laundry operation for a hotel is the second highest operating cost for a hotel after labor. So, and there's no insight into what's going on. So one of my operating partners was the former VP of procurement for MGM Resorts. And another friend of ours was the chief procurement officer for Caesars Entertainment. We called him up and said, "What do you think about this?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, this is the dumpster fire of my existence in a hotel operation. There's literally no insight as to what the hell is happening there. And there's stuff everywhere. And when you're running a hospitality organization at scale, like an MGM or Hilton or anybody else, this is literally hundreds of millions of dollars just thrown out the door every year." And so Laundress created a way to attach really, really low cost, simple RFID tags to everything and also have them sewn in at the manufacturer, and then created the technology to track it all. So they used some fairly simple RFID tracking tools to be able to track everything as it goes through the facility, the connects at choke points and everything else. And now you have 100% visibility into where all of those linens are. Because if you are missing it, operators would have to just order it just straight from the distributor or the manufacturer. Like, we don't know where it is. We need to order more. And that's constantly happening. You had no idea how often these things were getting ragged out. They're supposed to last 100 washes. They're only lasting 40. You have no way to track it. Now you can track all of it. And so they built in a bunch of AI tools around productivity and procurement and management and all of that. And it's fascinating. So now operators are looking at, seriously, like a 30% reduction in cost. And they have 100% visibility, and they can deploy their most expensive asset, their people, to out doing other things to better serve their customers. Because you don't have these folks in their folding towels, counting towels, figuring out where the hell everything is. And you've just reduced all of that expense, all of that cost, all of that waste. And then from a sustainability environmental level, now they're going to be reducing the amount of detergents and chemicals and water and everything else that they're able to use because they have that visibility now. And so there's a whole lot more to tell about that, but really interesting company. They're doing well right now. They just landed a big customer, a big global customer. So again, it's recurring revenue, and it's solving a real problem for these operators that in a world that has paper thin margins. So anything that's going to help that operator enable more margin is valuable. And so I love Laundress. Very neat company. There's a bigger story behind him. It was a minority founder. He came out of tech and designed, built this whole thing on his own, tested it all out, and then just went at it. And so really, really like their story and what they're doing. I'm excited to continue helping them out. But again, it's a boring thing no one even thinks about. And it costs piles of money every year. And so, yeah, neat, great. It's still, they're going to be blowing up the rest of this year, and it's one that we're extremely bullish on, and we're already working into other verticals into healthcare. Healthcare's got their own gigantic margin problem, and they need everything that they can to reduce the cost. And again, it's mostly a supply chain problem, and our companies are going to be able to help fix that.
All right, JP, if anyone wants to find out more about you, what you're working on, what's the best way to go about doing that?
Email's the best, like my work queue. Just jpk@prochain.vc.
Perfect. We'll have that information in the show notes. And for our audience out there, well, I'm not the host of the Silicon Valley podcast. I'm an investment banker focused on mergers, acquisitions, growth capital. Connect with me on my LinkedIn, Sean Flynn. And for everyone out there, check out the website, the Silicon Valley podcast. You can see our archives. We alluded to Ravi Balani, that interview with the founder of Alchemist. There's so many other great interviews in our archives, from founder of Canva to Intel Capital to Juniper Networks and more. And with that, JP, I want to thank you for taking the time to be on this week's episode of the Silicon Valley Podcast.
Thanks, Sean. It was a blast.